We're here today for the Adipec Virtual Energy Dialogues. The theme of this conversation is Building the Future. How will decarbonization strategies be positioned post-COVID-19? And I'm delighted to have Mehren with us, the CEO of Wintershall DEA, the largest independent oil and gas company in Europe. Mario, wonderful to see you again. Thanks for being with us. So much to talk about. I just want to start by asking you a little bit about what this last few months has been like for you as a leader, for Wintershall DEA as a company, for your people in the midst of this historic pandemic, this historic oil market crash, a huge number of challenges. Talk a little bit about what it's been like to manage that, manage the company through this period of turmoil, and what learnings and lessons you've derived from that.
Jason, indeed. I mean, I think calling 2020 a challenging year is quite a mild expression for what actually has been happening. We entered the year with already very low gas prices in northwestern Europe. Then we have seen the pandemic and the oil price crash. I think for us, we had, as many companies, three priorities. The first priority was obviously the health and safety of our people. The second one was business continuity, making sure that Wintershall DEA continues to produce energy that is still needed by the world. And thirdly, obviously, look into our cash positions. So looking at these three parameters, we have already in March started to work from home. We have sent basically all administrative staff to work from home. We have reduced the operational facility staffing to the bare minimum. And with that, we have actually been able to limit the impact of COVID-19 on both our administrative processes, but also on production, which is stable, I have to say. At the same time, we have looked into our investment programs. We have reduced CapEx, we have reduced exploration, we have done some cost cutting. So I think we have done everything to keep our cash together, to keep liquidity sufficient in order to maneuver Wintershall Dea through this unprecedented crisis. And we have been successful with that. So we have a very strong and solid liquidity cushion that helps us moving forward. I think since you asked what might last coming out of this crisis, to me, I would say COVID-19 is the digital employee of the year. I think it has given a significant push towards making Wintershall Dea even more digital. I think a lot of tools that we are using, a lot of formats, a lot of interactions came into Wintershall Dea at the speed of lightning, basically. And I would not have envisaged that. So I'm extremely proud of the team. I'm extremely proud how we have managed this situation so far, and people start really appreciating flexibility as working from home, not to commute on a daily basis. So it's a challenging and demanding situation, but also a great experience.
Yeah, and Mario, in recent weeks, obviously, we've seen some of the major oil and gas companies around the world reporting some of their worst quarterly results in history. Looking at how companies are responding to this downturn, some of the recent cuts in CapEx, can you talk about how different the industry is going to look moving forward? And in particular, when we think of the energy transition, the subject of our discussion today, do you think trying to address issues around emissions starts to take a back seat in the context of these economic struggles?
Well, first of all, I think the industry and also we as Wintershall Dea have taken the right steps in looking into spendings and reducing spendings significantly. We as Wintershall Dea always had the strategy to be a resilient company, a company for all seasons. We have industry low production costs per unit, and I think that's important to have that, because I'm convinced we are going to see more of this volatility and potentially extreme volatility in the future. At the same time, we are not free of what's happening, so we will also see an impact on Wintershall Dea's figures when we go out next week with the Q2 financial statements. With regard to energy transition, from my personal point of view, this is the most essential question of our times. and I think it's not going to change. So we as a company, as Wintershall DEA, and I'm as the CEO of Wintershall DEA, we are going to tackle this issue with what we can, with our strategy, with our company, with our technologies. I'm not a big supporter of this theory that the work on energy transition will get a setback because of this pandemic. It simply remains too important, and I think not a single company can afford to say, I'm stepping back because of the pandemic.
And where do you see, let's talk just for a minute about kind of where energy markets are headed as the world continues to deal with the impact of coronavirus. We're seeing demand recover, although obviously some parts of it, like jet fuel, are going to be impaired for a while. Do you think we've seen peak oil? Are we in for lower for longer oil prices? How do you see the market evolving?
I don't, unfortunately, I don't have the crystal ball to tell you that. When it comes to the oil demand, I would say it will take quite a while to get back to the pre-crisis levels. I mean, you talked about jet fuel. I would say transportation in a whole will suffer for quite a while. We have been in more or less a lockdown mode in many places for 4 to 5 months now. And people get used to having meetings in a virtual way. People get used to travel less and benefit from that. So I think it will take really a while before that recovers. Also, we have to see if a second wave of the pandemic is coming. If it comes, it will have a significant impact again on oil demand, I'm pretty sure. On the gas side, however, I see it more positive. I mean, as every year, it will depend a little bit on how the winter season is going. Will we see in the northern hemisphere average or below average temperatures? But I think the gas demand is going to pick up quicker than the oil demand, and we could see that already in parts of Asia, actually. I think you clearly see it in Asia, and then one of the drivers is continuing to be the replacement of coal by gas in order to reduce emissions. That has been a major driver already over the last couple of years. You will see a similar effect in parts of Europe. Germany, where we are based, is phasing out of coal, and gas and renewables are kind of taking the place of coal there. And there are others going to come. So I definitely think the underlying trend for gas is okay, although we have to state also that currently we have an oversupply of gas also, like we have for oil, and prices are suffering, but they came back quite nicely over the last couple of days.
I guess in the oil market, there are some areas you might even see a little bit of a boost to demand. We obviously are seeing mass transit levels in cities like Beijing quite a bit lower than they were before the pandemic, and car ownership starting to inch up. So there may be some cases, but.
Absolutely, but I think these impacts are really difficult to assess now, and therefore I'm saying I don't have the crystal ball. What will also be interesting looking forward is seeing how actually the capex cuts that were quite massive now are going to impact the supply side. So I hope that this entire situation is not leading into actually a supply problem in 18, 24, 36 months time from now. So I think we also as an industry have to learn how to actually make sure that the cut in potential production in the future is not equivalent to the cut in capex. In other words, how can we become more effective and efficient with the money we're spending in capex?
Yeah, I mean, interested to get your take on that, because there is some concern you hear that that we may be setting ourselves up for an underinvestment cycle if demand does recover. And you talked about the cutbacks in capex, and some of this is driven by, we've seen these large commitments from some oil firms, particularly the European majors, moving to the topic of energy transition toward increased investment in renewables, net zero by 2050 targets, and rising social pressures to show that business models are aligned with our long-term climate goals. What's your reaction to those sort of net zero by 2050 targets? what does that mean for the market in the near to medium term? And then, how does a very large independent like Wintershall DEA think about its role in the energy transition and transitioning potentially to lower carbon types of energy?
Well, we are for sure also coming out during the course of the year with our ambition levels with regards to reduction of emissions, with our contribution to the net zero targets. But it's too early to make an announcement on that one now. In principle, Wintershall DEA is contributing a lot to reducing emissions with its gas strategy. I'm still convinced that we are not going to succeed in managing the energy transition if we don't have a clear focus on gas short and midterm. I think this is both an effective but also an affordable way of reducing emissions. And that's why we, by the way, call Wintershall DEA a gas and oil company. We are 70% gas and only 30% oil. And I think this is a very dominant part of our energy transition approach. At the same time, I think Wintershall DEA will look and is looking actually into technologies that are close to our business and supporting the energy transition. Hydrogen is one. We have a fantastic cooperation with the Karlsruhe Institute for Technology working on pyrolysis, so making industrial production CO2 free when you look into steel and similar processes. We are looking into CCS, having some first pilot projects, for example, in Denmark, looking into activities in Norway. I think this is something where we, with our competencies and capabilities as Wintershall DEA, can add value. I don't see us investing into renewables like the majors do. That's simply a different ball game where I don't think we are positioned in a favorable way.
And obviously, the role of natural gas in a deeply decarbonized world is one that does require additional technologies to be brought to bear. It's the question of whether there should be investment in gas infrastructure today, and the role of gas is one that, as you know, is controversial in discussions in Brussels. Just from your perspective, what do people there need to understand, and what does the industry need to do to show that there should be a role for natural gas in a world that is moving to get to very deep decarbonization or net zero targets?
My first recommendation to everybody, actually, in particular policymakers, would be technology open. At the end, I think we need carbon-free energy. I think hydrogen is going to play a major part in that. But it will take time. And as long as hydrogen is carbon-free, I think we shouldn't care whether it's the so-called green hydrogen or the blue hydrogen or the turquoise hydrogen. We should talk about hydrogen. And that's the most concerning part about the debate currently in Europe, but also in Germany. It's a very dogmatic discussion around green hydrogen. And that's having a little bit the problem that on the one hand side, there is not sufficient and cost-efficient hydrogen production. On the other hand side, there are no applications. So I think we have to overcome that. And from my perspective, the only way to overcome this is really to be technology open, to make sure that we can decarbonize natural gas and then create a hydrogen market. And that's actually something where we as Wintershall DEA are quite eagerly working on, because we think this is a key component of a successful energy transition.
It does seem, our analysis shows, blue hydrogen today, lower cost than green hydrogen. The question is sort of where the market is headed and what you can scale. And there does seem to be a very strong focus now on trying to figure out how to bring down the cost of electrolyzers and scale up renewable energy to make green hydrogen. That seems to be where the focus of a lot of the discussion in Brussels is. How do you see things playing out as between green and blue hydrogen and the balance moving forward?
Well, as I said before, I think we as an industry need to make sure that blue hydrogen remains on the table as an option, because, as you rightly said, it is currently the most cost-effective option that we have, and it's currently also the one option where we have sufficient capacity. I mean, if you look at hydrogen coming purely from renewables, that requires a massive investment and massive resources, not only from a money point of view, but we are talking about land, we are talking about setting up new windmills, we are talking about setting up new solar farms, we are talking about new infrastructure. All that needs time and needs also social acceptance. So I think it would be a shame if we wouldn't make use of the infrastructure that we are having, if we wouldn't make use of the energy source that we are having. And therefore, people like myself, like some others in our industry, continue to make sure that while Brussels prefers to talk about green hydrogen, they are not forgetting blue hydrogen.
What sort of policy do you think would you like to see come out of Brussels? And then obviously EU leaders just reached an agreement on a new green stimulus package, the next generation EU, to make fighting climate change central to Europe's economic recovery. What was your reaction to that package? What did you like and not like about it?
Well, what I like about the package is that it's giving, in a way, a clear target. Where it's much more unspecific is how to get there, and that's one of the issues you quite often have when you look at these kind of policies coming, in particular, out of the European Commission. So, in other words, it's talking a lot about green hydrogen, but it's not saying what is actually necessary in order to get there in an industrial scale for a continent like Europe, which is still highly industrialized, and people tend to forget that. We are in competition as a continent with producers in the US, in China, and we need to have access to competitively priced energy. And therefore, I would have wished, as I said, a little bit more open-mindedness in terms of technology and a little bit more realism also with regard to what can be achieved with green hydrogen in what period of time, and acknowledging a little bit louder and clearer that blue hydrogen is needed to simply get to the targets.
Mario, as Europe begins to apply more climate-related screens to its energy imports, it's talking about a carbon border adjustment. What more can be done to ensure sort of the continue and European gas imports? I assume you think will probably continue to rise. What do you think how do you think that's going to play out, and what is that going to mean for different sources of imports, including those planned for delivery through Nord Stream 2, perhaps?
Well, I think first of all, we need to make sure that we get the right methane pass, that we get the right methane information and measurements, and that's also something where the methane guiding principles are working on in order to get transparency. What is actually the methane emission level of certain sources of gas? I think there is a lot of estimations and guesstimates currently out there, so it's difficult to say what that at the end would mean. With regard to the border adjustment tax, I'm a little bit skeptical on how that is supposed to work, given that we have WTO regulations picking different countries and adding taxes to their products. I think is going to be difficult. I think you might also find different ways, like methane emissions prices that you could bring out there, and again, creating transparency so that people are aware of what they're doing when they're actually buying a product.
Coming forward, what role for companies that are really serious and focused on trying to reduce methane, like Wintershall DEA, what can be done to help kind of improve the footprint in that regard?
I think it starts with our operations, where we really need to go into each and every facility, identify where we have fugitive methane emissions, and then stop them. I think that's a very important step, and then of course, since many of the IOCs and NOCs are part of the methane guiding principles, if we all do it in our operations, it should be an obvious thing that it also happens in partner operated activities. So we should see quite some progress there, and then of course, there's still one thing happening in the world, which is flaring, which is, I think, something nobody is proud of in the industry, which definitely needs to be tackled in a stricter way. I mean, Wintershall DEA is part of the World Bank initiative. We have banned flaring in routine operations for quite a while already. And nevertheless, this is still going to be an issue. And at the end, it should be an issue that can be solved economically, because if you don't flare your product, you hopefully can sell it.
Yeah, certainly it's been an increased focus in the U.S. where you've seen flaring rates in the Permian quite high. Absolutely. And if we start to see U.S. LNG exports once again show up in Europe, I expect the scrutiny on that will increase, not decrease, moving forward.
Well, absolutely. That's one of the discussions that you're going to have about the methane footprint of gas arriving in Europe. I mean, of course, there's a lot of discussions about the reliability of measurements in Russia, but I think we have the same story when we look into the US. So that's definitely going to be a topic.
And what, I mean, one of the questions about what the role for gas will certainly just be the future of gas pricing. What trend do you see for long-term contracts versus gas-on-gas competition and hub-based pricing? And can European gas import prices stay this low? And if not, what range do you see them returning to?
Well, I think European import prices will stay relatively low, hopefully not as low as they are currently, but we have a good supply situation. That is one of the benefits of having infrastructure leading to everywhere, be it pipelines to Russia, to Norway, be it LNG terminals. So we have everything. And I think that's a great benefit, a great positive for Europe. So all in all, I think we will have a very well supplied market, and that will prevent prices from spiking. In terms of pricing mechanisms, for the very same reason, I think we will see more and more the hub-based pricing. I think longer term pricing mechanisms are going to disappear. You see also a convergence of the price levels in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. 18 months ago, 24 months ago, I think we were still talking three different kind of market areas. Now it gets much closer together. Everything is much more interlinked. So we might develop into also a global gas pricing, just like we have.
We talked about the role of gas as we shift toward deep decarbonization. You talked about repurposing gas infrastructure toward things like hydrogen. Do you think, say, renewable natural gas might be part of decarbonization, refined as biogas and then injected into natural gas pipelines?
Sure. As I said, I think the key to a successful energy transition is to be technology open, and in addition to try to make as much out of existing infrastructure as possible, because infrastructure activities, infrastructure construction is not amongst the most favorable things, at least in Europe. So I think everything that has been discussed around power to gas, around using existing gas pipeline infrastructure for be it hydrogen, be it renewable gas, should be looked into. Absolutely.
You talked earlier about, Wintershall DEA, I think, has, I've heard you talk before about the importance of technology, digital and automation technologies. Just tell me what you're doing in that regard, and then how has that changed, if at all, as a result of COVID-19? How you think about the role of digital and automation technologies in the industry?
Well, we always thought that digital is going to be a main driver for any kind of improvement in our industry, and we have plenty of room for improvement in all spheres of our industry, be it in optimizing our production, reducing our emissions footprints, but also obviously in managing better uncertainties when it comes to subsurface activity. So it was always extremely important. What has changed, I think, is the speed. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, the pandemic has even accelerated all the initiatives there when it comes to remote working, when it comes to having less people on offshore installations and all these kind of things. So that's something we are also working on. but also more sophisticated things like we are working on an exploration advisory tool where we use artificial intelligence that we have developed together with IBM. So this is all things where I'm very convinced that digital transformation will help oil and gas companies to become more efficient and at the end also more cost effective. And this is urgently needed given the volatility of commodity prices that we see, given that commodity price cycles get shorter and shorter. I mean, it's just 6 years ago that we have seen 2014, the oil prices going down, then it was 2009. So it's these days no longer true that you see a cycle every 10 to 15 years. It's rather every 5 to 6 years that something happens.
And obviously, I think we can understand why those sorts of digital technologies could help reduce costs if you switch toward automation, for example. Just help people watching this understand how does it help with decarbonization? How does it help with the environmental footprint? Those sorts of technologies.
Yeah, I mean, we are working as Wintershall DEA on what we call digital twins. So we are having integrated digital models of our fields, like, for example, in Norway, the Brage field, like our Mittelplate oil field in Germany. And integrated means you have everything from subsurface to the facilities in one digital model, and then you can start optimizing your production process. You can have a better predictive maintenance. You can stop production when you detect, for example, a leakage of methane somewhere in order to get that better. So if production runs more flawlessly, then obviously you have less emissions, less impact, and I think their digital can definitely play a role and is actually already playing a role.
The Wintershall Dea's IPO has been slated to be one of Europe's largest 2020. How have the IPO plans been affected by the downturn and the pandemic?
Well, I guess we have always made two statements. The one is that we as a company are going to be IPO ready in 2020, and we are IPO ready in 2020. The other topic was, of course, that we and also our shareholders always said that an IPO is subject to market conditions. And if we see now the overall situation of commodity prices, of the equity markets, then I don't think 2020 is a year where we should float the company. And then both shareholders have also said that publicly. So let's see what the year 2021 brings. We as a company, as a management team, are ready. I think we have a great equity story with our gas focus, with our technology focus, having a very resilient portfolio in terms of cost. So it's a great story, and we are convinced that sooner or later the time will come where the company will become a public company.
And you have such a broad global footprint: Europe, Latin America, North Africa, the Middle East. When you look out over the next several years, as a result of the market turmoil we've seen this year, the pandemic, how has your global strategy shifted at all? Are there new potential international partnerships, new markets that you think make sense? Are there certain areas that, for geopolitical challenges, policy risk, or anything else, look better or worse right now?
Well, I guess geopolitical challenges you have almost everywhere where you are active these days. Unfortunately, I don't want to be cynical, but in fact, you have the one or the other debate everywhere around the globe. I think for a company of Wintershall Dea's size, it is and will always be important to stay focused. So we will never try to be a global player being everywhere. I think we feel quite comfortable with being in 8 to 10 different jurisdictions, different regions in terms of doing business. We have some that are more mature and some that are more focused on growth. Abu Dhabi is obviously one of the areas where we want to grow. We are in Brazil, we are in Mexico with interesting exploration activity. So this is the areas where we definitely want to grow. And then we have to see. We always have an open eye on the M&A market, of course, and this environment will bring opportunities. But as usual for M&A, I think it's better to announce when you have something to announce.
Just to close, can you tell us what you think Wintershall Dea looks like say in 2050? We talked earlier in the conversation about some of these long-term net zero targets, about European majors saying, in 2050, we're not going to be oil and gas companies anymore. We're going to be renewable companies or electricity companies. And your comment that doesn't quite make sense for a large E&P independent like Wintershall DEA. But if we get to the deep decarbonization goals policymakers have, and climate science tells us we need to, or even anywhere close to it, what does Wintershall DEA look like as a company in 2050?
Well, I think in 2050, Wintershall DEA hopefully is a company that is leading in CCS technologies, that is very involved in hydrogen, making sure that we have clean hydrogen, continuing to produce gas, using it for energy, but then in the form of hydrogen, using the sea in order to produce chemicals whatsoever as a raw material. A company that is still producing oil, but hopefully this oil is then also much too precious to be burnt, but rather used in chemical processes. We should not forget that we use oil. We need oil for our smartphones, for medicine, for whatsoever. So that's a role where Wintershall DEA is going to be active. I'm pretty convinced.
And you think the policy, the most important advice you have for policymakers in order to allow that to evolve is what moving forward?
It's two things. It's the technology openness that I mentioned before, but also realism. We need to be ambitious, but we also need to be realistic. And the moment we exclude certain technologies because we think they are not en vogue from a dogmatic point of view, we are not going to reach our targets.
So when you say realistic, you don't mean let's move more slowly to try to deal with the climate challenge, but you just mean cast a wide net in terms of potential solutions.
Exactly. It's not about being slower. It's about allowing everybody to invest, to develop technologies that brings us closer to the target. If then at the end the market decides that between green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, the green is cheaper and only green hydrogen will be sold, fine. But at the end, what we need, just to stick to the example of hydrogen, is CO2-free hydrogen. And if this is available, we shouldn't care too much about where it comes from.
Well, things are changing very quickly in terms of technology, the ESG and social pressures to deal more urgently with the threat of climate change, and then obviously a pandemic and a historic oil market collapse, and doing that at a time where you're bringing two companies together and getting ready for an IPO. So it's been a challenging year, and I know how much you've had on your plate, Mario. I appreciate your making time to be with us this morning on Adipec Energy Dialogues and share some of your insights and experience and views with all of our viewers. I really appreciate it. It was a fascinating conversation. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. And my congratulations actually to the organizers of Adipec. I think this is an extremely valuable format that you have been creating here, allowing people to exchange views, even in these times where, unfortunately, it's not possible to have huge events like Adipec in physical presence. Yeah,
probably won't see you in person in November in Abu Dhabi, but hopefully we'll see you at the Adipec virtual conference in November, and then in person the following year. So thanks again, Mario, for your time.
Thank you, Jason. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.